Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
Hello, I'm Richard Hattersley, and welcome to No Account for Taste from your friends at accountingweb.co.uk. Our editor-in-chief, John Stockdyke, is unable to join us today, but don't worry, I'm delighted to say that in his place we are joined by a regular voice to the show. It's, of course, Ray Newman, the head of content at Practice Web. Hello, Ray. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Richard. Lovely to be here as always.
Well, this week on the show, we're examining the struggles musicians and the art sector has experienced over the past 12 months due to coronavirus restrictions and the fallout from Brexit. And we'll find out what the knock-on effect has been for accountants specializing in this sector, especially with MTD on the horizon. So in Accountant's Corner this week is Louise Harrington from Performance Accountancy, an accountant who is unfortunately all too familiar with those stresses. Welcome to the show, Louise.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
So, Louise, before we launch properly into the show, you specialize with musicians and the art sector in particular. Ray, this is something which is kind of close to yourself and Practice Web because you're all about kind of being great proponents of encouraging accountants to engage with their clients with a particular specialism or a particular passion. So, Louise, talk us through how come the musicians, what led you to tread the boards with this kind of clients?
Well, the background is I've always loved music. I used to play clarinet, saxophone, sing, but my father said, music's not a career, get yourself a career. So I thought, okay, what can I do? So I went off and studied business studies and accounts, and then sat there and thought, well, my brother's a chartered accountant, so that seems okay. I'll do that then. Whatever he can do, I can do, sort of thing, So I studied, qualified, and then was rather bored afterwards, thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And I wanted to get back to music, so I got myself a singing teacher who thought I had some sort of potential there. I joined the English National Opera training course in the last century and trained there for a year. Discovered that accountants earn more money than opera singers. That was a bit of a shock, but there you go. And when the recession hit, I tried to work as a singer properly. And then you think, well, who actually employs singers in a recession? That's a bad move, Lou. And so I started my practice because what I found is when I was in the green room, having done a performance or concerts, people are struggling filling up forms and lots of bits of paper, and they just don't understand what they were doing. So I thought, well, isn't this sort of a nice niche that I could get into, admit I'm an accountant, but specialise in mainly classical musicians, opera singers, music theatre actors, so stressing down on that side and helping them out. So that kind of is how it came about. It wasn't sort of, oh, I need to think of a niche. It was a pretty obvious niche because having lived the life that musicians live, you kind of know what their stresses are, and trying to be creative whilst sorting out accounts and tax isn't really very good. They don't blend at all. So I think I've just got a funny brain that can do the accounts and tax and be creative.
Brilliant. And what more do you want? And Ray, this is Louise has kind of managed to do this, find her passion pretty easily. But at Practice Web, one of the things you do is kind of help people find their niche or find a particular specialism. But it's not always as easy as what as Louise found, is it?
No, so what we do is we're a marketing agency, as people might know, and we work with specifically with accountancy firms. And wherever we can, we do like to encourage firms to try and find a specialism or a niche, something that they can sort of call their own. And as you say, there isn't always an obvious one. So you'll occasionally sort of say to clients, "What is it about, your clients that gets you fired up?" And they say, "Well, making money." And it's trying to get beyond that a bit. So, but what do you enjoy? Which clients do you enjoy working with the most, or even which are the most profitable? So, if you can get people to just dial in a little bit and think about which of their clients they would like more of, that's sometimes the question when we do something called a buyer persona exercise, which is sometimes as part of our workshops, and it's who is your ideal client. And it's interesting when you get to the point when you have that conversation, help people through the thought process, and they get to the point where they say, you know what, actually, yes, now you say it, we need more Johns and not as many Teds. It helps them really dial in on the clients they don't enjoy working with and don't want as many of, and the clients that they would actually like to be focusing their time and energy on. And yeah, creative industries actually feels like a bit of a growth area, because I think there's something quite fun about working with, even if the work you're doing isn't itself creative, working with creative clients can be quite sort of exciting and fun, I think.
And certainly fun to visit your clients, especially whilst they're working, I'm sure, Louise.
Well, I don't visit them whilst they're actually working. Like, let's go into the pit of Matilda whilst the show's on. That will probably be a bit annoying, really.
Yeah, quiet down. Stop talking about bookkeeping down there. Matilda's on the stage.
Here, I've got your tax return to sign. Would you like to sign it now? Yeah, probably not really very good.
That's it.
But
One for the interval.
It's not necessarily easy to find those clients.
No.
The musician or market, etc., is very much a word of mouth, and it still is. It's like performers. It is a lot of who you know, but it is word of mouth. And if you upset the person, that word of mouth goes even quicker.
Yeah. And with a lot of our clients as well, where we're trying to sort of help them through digital marketing, it's where they haven't got that word of mouth connection. It's about a couple of things. One is making sure that when people search for example, accountants for photographers, we had some success getting a client, lots of photography clients a year or so ago. So it's making sure that first their website comes up when people search for that quite obvious term, and that then when someone who is a photographer goes to their website, they believe it. So you'll quite often see people get the first bit right, they get themselves ranking. My other half, as I say, is an accountant. She was recently looking for a specialist accountant to work with the charity that she works for. And she found lots of accountancy firms that came up in search results for charity accountants. But when she went to their website, nothing on the website backed up that expertise. So there's something as well about having that credibility. And I guess what comes across, Louise, with you is that a genuine passion and for that work and a knowledge of that sector, which is such a big selling point to people. It's like, okay, I really am dealing with someone that talks my language and gets it, not someone that just, is someone who thinks it looks like a nice paycheck. It's actually, there's some sort of genuine passion behind your niche.
Yeah. And yes, my practice is mainly compliance, because obviously you don't get too many musicians that want all singing, all dancing, advisory services, etc., etc., etc. And that's fine, because some, when they get bigger, in inverted commas, do start needing that. So you're kind of nurturing them at the beginning of their career, or in the middle, ready if if they turn around to saying, yes, I'm now going into step-ins in the German opera houses, what do I do? Okay, so this is what we need to do now, blah blah blah. So it's building that trust at the beginning of their career, that they can then turn around to you and say, okay, what do I do now? And it's a case of, well, if I don't know what to do, then I have contacts in some of the big firms to say, look, don't know what to do with this one. Are you able to take this client on?
I very much enjoyed how it's very on brand as well, how you described it, Louise, as all singing services. So thank you for that. Well, before we dive any further into this topic, we must blast through the 3 most read stories of the past 7 days on Accounting Web. And at number 3 this week was a story about the latest threat to Excel, or certainly as they like to think they are. So this was Nick Levine investigated Causal, a UK startup which plans to succeed Excel with more data-driven collaborative approach. So this is Causal. Ray, what's your thinking about this one? So it's a new software, which a cloud-based model, which obviously sells itself on being pretty collaborative. Is it a threat to Excel, or is it just another one trying to catch on to the beast of the spreadsheet we know and love?
Well, so I should declare my interest at this point, which is that, again, I mentioned both my brother and my other half are accountants, and they're both also Excel freaks. They both swear by Excel, and it's I would say, I've been very much drilled into the idea that even in this age, people have been saying Excel is dead for years, or Excel, there's no place for it, and they would both say absolutely not the case. Excel's going to be with us for a good while, just because I think for a certain type of accountant, the fact that you can actually almost get really dig into the behind the back end really, and get involved with scripting and artificial intelligence and all of that stuff within Excel, and it also, it's just that sort of plain, straightforward numbers. The sense of control over the data, I think, is very appealing. So yeah, I would always say good luck to anyone challenging that. And I think they're probably for sort of consumers. There's certainly an argument to say that Excel is overcomplicated and a bit overfacing. But I think for serious accountants who like Excel, I can't see what any challenges the market will offer that would make them switch, especially given that Excel also increasingly just as most software does, challengers come along and they go, that is a good idea, and they just borrow the same idea and incorporate it into the next version. So, there was a point when it looked like Google Sheets was actually giving Excel a bit of a run for its money with collaboration tools, and Excel just said, great, we'll also do all of that. So, no, I think Excel's pretty impossible to challenge, and I don't see particularly why Causal would be the one that does it, despite Nick's very compelling arguments.
Louise, are you a big Excel user yourself?
I am. It tends to be the accounting tool for my clients. So Excel or numbers. I only know how to use Excel, but it is used in terms of just a data collection tool. So rather than actual, let's run pivot tables and macros and all sorts of analysis through it, it is just a tool for them to put their data onto it. So we actually have some accounting records there in electronic format, so I don't have to go through loads and loads of paper. But that's another issue. So yes, I am an Excel fan, but I don't do any of the complicated stuff that accountants might do for much bigger clients.
Right. So actually, for you, maybe a version of Excel which does that sort of data capture and organization stuff, but actually doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles, and therefore maybe runs a bit more quickly, or is a bit more convenient to use, might be somewhat appealing.
Yes, it might be. Especially with things coming up that I don't want to know about yet, but I do know about.
Well, that's Excel. That's Excel and Causal. One to watch, I'm sure, to see if they succeed in their plans to try and topple the spreadsheet giant. Moving on to the second most read story, and this was the news that HMRC has warned businesses of mini umbrella fraud danger. So days after the BBC reported of around 48,000 mini umbrella companies were created to reduce recruiters' national insurance contribution, HMRC has issued new guidance to warn businesses of the potential dangers of fraud in their supply chain. More worryingly, though, we did speak with Rebecca Seeley-Harris, and she said that the wider problem of the use of umbrellas is pretty much the tip of the iceberg. She said she expects that the BBC report is maybe just one of many out there which is kind of abusing this system. Ray, have you got any thoughts on this? It's been kind of a big story over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a classic case of one of those stories where you sort of just roll your eyes in frustration. That I think with any of these things that they, it might seem like a clever wheeze, but it will eventually, people will catch up with you, and then suddenly you've got these sort of problems that stretch across entire industries and take all this unpicking. And I suppose I just always find myself wondering, I suppose it must be worth it, even if eventually it will get rumbled and the loophole will be closed, or in this case, prosecutions and investigations might happen. So, the motivation to do it must be pretty strong, knowing that down the line eventually it will backfire. I just find it baffling that it's worth people's while, really, not to just follow the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, and do what they know is the intention, what HMRC expects them to do, rather than trying to sort of pull these fast ones, essentially.
Our most read story of this week was the news that KPMG faces a $6 million legal battle over alleged slipshod advice to property firms. This is news that a London home builder that fell foul of an HMRC investigation which uncovered millions in unpaid liabilities is taking KPMG to court for the accounting error. Of course, this reminds advisors just how tax in tax can be. Our reporter Mike Taylor caught up with Pete Miller, and Pete actually pointed out a very good and worthwhile thing to remind ourselves that um, HMRC once advertised that tax isn't taxing, which is catchy but untrue, he said. And he said that regardless of the rights and wrongs of this case, it almost certainly arisen because tax is complicated, because the tax rules are frequently not clear, and because the tax code doesn't always fit easily with the reality of commercial transactions. Um, he also goes on to remind advisors that they should ensure that their clients are aware of any risk arrears, so that they have been properly warned about risk and tax at stake, and only advise in areas where you are competent to do so, which I think is an important point. Ray, any thoughts on this story and also Miller's advice?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things about this, I suppose. One, which is I've over the years dealt with a lot of accountants who, almost as part of their sales pitch, say, if you switch to us, we will save you. We will reduce your tax bill by finding allowances and reliefs that your previous accountant probably wasn't claiming. So there's always that sort of push and pull, that promise that actually, there are probably more savings to be found if you're with the right accountant who really knows their stuff. So on the one hand, that benefits accountants, but at the same time, that difficulty, I think you get the sense that what clients often want is, can you just give me a straight answer? And of course, quite a lot of the time you can't, because HMRC, as the article points out, often their guidance is a bit unclear. They sometimes haven't maybe pinned down the fine detail of certain things themselves yet. So it's a little bit like, oh, we hadn't thought of that question, we need to sort of work that through, or that needs to be settled in a tribunal or whatever. Tax is very large parts of tax, perhaps actually, Louise, not necessarily as it sounds like the bits that you specialize in working with, but there are lots of that more sort of the more complicated tax efficiency stuff very often does require sort of judgment, and at a certain point, like any other professional advisor, an expert with experience and training has to make a call and say, I think this is the safest bet. And some accountants will be more risk averse than others. Some will say, go on, go for it, why not? But I think the article makes a really good point, which is that's what the indemnity insurance is there for, is so that you can make a confident call and advise your clients, and hopefully be confident that, if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, it's not because of you've been negligent or lazy. It's because, the system is complicated and you've made your best effort to give good advice. And if something changes or the rules change or a judgment goes against you, that's not your fault. Essentially, you have done your best to advise your clients. So I think this is interesting. I guess what would be interesting is if in the legal case it's flushed out that there was evidence that the people at KPMG maybe didn't take as much time over some of the decisions as they should have done, or weren't as careful as they might have been. It doesn't sound to me like that's the argument. It sounds to me like if we had a different accountant, they would have been braver at making these claims on our behalf. And I think that's where that feels to me like that's where the indemnity insurance comes in. And, you choose your accountant and you get what you get.
But I do agree with the fact, don't take on work you're probably not qualified to do. Yes, we're qualified accountants, but we might not have the experience in a certain area. And I know that was the case with me. Bit of personal history is that I qualified in the last century. Mm-hmm. But I didn't continue in the external audit, accounting, blah, blah, blah. I went off into industry and I played a lot in accounting systems. So you've got a new accounting system, I'll break it for you, not a problem. But then when I came back to being in practice because of, the recession and no one's spending billions on Oracle or SAP, I then thought, yeah, piece of cake, I can do this. But I didn't realize so much had changed. Like, what is IXBRL? And I started taking on company clients that, I can do your year-end stuff, not a problem. And then had a complete mental breakdown because I didn't know about all these changes, all these rules, etc. So I learned from there, if there's something you don't think you know about, tell the client straight away, pass them on to somebody that probably does know how to do things.
Yeah, I always really respect, actually, when you hear an accountant say, you know what, that's not my area of expertise, but I know someone who can help you with it. That always says, to me, speaks of a certain sort of confidence, like you know what you know. Yeah. And as I think we were talking about before the recording, Louise, that people that try to be everything to every single client often end up sort of not really being anything particular to any client, unless you've got a large team full of people with their own expertise. I think saying you know what you know and you work with who you work with is actually, again, it's a sign of confidence, and it would give me as a client the confidence to think, okay, this person, when they tell me they know about R&D tax credits, they really do, because that's the thing they focus on. And when I asked them about something else, they referred me to another accountant. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
Yeah, so it's things like residency issues. So I do have clients that might go into Europe for 2 years. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with split years residency here. Do they do a tax return here? Are they on an A1 form, etc.? It's like, residency is not my bag, but here's a contact that might be able to help you, or this is a firm of accountants I know about that deal with it, contact them.
Yeah.
So if anyone does know residency rules, please let me know.
That brings us to the end of the most read stories of the week, and then brings us on to the main event of today's podcast, which is looking at musicians, MTD, COVID, the whole lot, the triple threat. At the start of the show, we did kind of summarize some of the issues for the art sector. But Louise, probably best to hear it from you. It's been kind of a rough ride this past 12 months, especially um, for your clients, especially the musicians, the ones in the arts sector.
Absolutely. Most of my clients still aren't back to work at all, because the West End isn't open at the moment. So, the pits aren't needing musicians, and they're reworking when they reopen, do we need 15, 20 musicians in the pit? Can we do something else? Actors haven't been working because there's been no theatres, even straight theatres on. People not wanting to take lessons from music teachers because it means close contact. And best will in the world, I know it works for a lot of people. I certainly wouldn't want to see my singing teacher over a Zoom call, because of my type of voice doesn't work with a little tiny microphone. So if you imagine sort of a great big Wagner aria coming down a webcam, it's not going to work. It's like, nah, never mind. So not seeing a singing teacher or a repetitor, it's like, I've got a lot of work to do to get myself back up on board. But the thing we found with COVID is a lot of musicians and actors will have a portfolio of income. So they will have PAYE jobs and they will have self-employed jobs. But because it's seasonal, it's a lot of the clients have missed out on any grants because they had seasonal PAYE that was obviously finished and left, but then they weren't over the 50% self-employed side. So they had no furlough because they'd actually not got any employment at the time, and no SCISS grant because they didn't hit the 50% bracket. So an awful lot of musicians that are clients of mine are now Amazon drivers or Hermes drivers or gone labouring on building sites. I hope none of them are pianists, but so they've really had to sit down and think. And the worry then is, are they going to go back to being a musician, or are they now used to having some sort of income on a regular basis?
So for yourself, Louise, what was that 12 months like just for you personally? I can imagine it being an incredible stressful time with so many of your clients having so many questions about their own future.
Yeah. At the beginning, I had to stop my business because unfortunately my father got ill, and having to deal with a dementia mother going to a care home. Then my father got COVID, and then my father died, etc. So I had like 2-3 months of not doing much work. And then I kind of sat there and thought, come on, pull your finger out. Your business might go a bit awry because your clients aren't working, but I'm always working a year behind. So I managed to expand the business because people were leaving much more expensive accountants to look for an alternative specialist that might not charge as much.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of paying, I don't know, £600-800 for their return, they could come to me and pay an awful lot less. So I then found I was growing the practice after the initial 3 months of which was brilliant. But now what I've got is, okay, clients haven't worked, So there's really nothing to go on the tax return. Some that have had SEISS or have managed to expand into a teaching practice, they're still coming, but a lot of people have got, we have no money, we can't pay your fee anyway, and there's nothing really to go on the tax return, we'll try and do it ourselves. So it's like, okay, that's interesting. So I'm expecting this year I will be affected with the COVID side for people not working last year. But there's a way to pivot in that I'm trying to write some training courses, and this is how you do your tax return, so people can buy a basic training course that takes them through the sections they want to do or they need to do to actually help them do their own tax return. It can have a benefit in that it helps my clients and it helps my niche market, and at least they're covered by most things. It could have a detrimental effect because people might not then come back to me, but it's still helping my client base.
And that obviously shows your passion for your clients and also that particular sector as well. Just trying to do what you can to help them. On top of all this, at the start of the year, there was the Brexit bill, the UK officially leaving the European Union. We are hearing news stories now about how the finer details of that is also affecting musicians.
Oh, big time. Big time. What would normally happen if I take an opera singer, for example? An opera singer would be able to get themselves an A1 form. For those that don't know, an A1 form allows somebody from the UK to work in Europe. They will still pay local tax, so withholding tax, somewhere between normally 15% and 40% if you're unlucky enough to go to Italy. And not pay the local social security, because the A1 form says that you pay national insurance in the UK, do not charge this person social security. And that worked great. If you could get a 2-year blanket one, it means you could do what we call hop-ins. So if somebody's taken ill and you've sung a role before, then they can contact you, you go over to fulfill a contract for 2 or 3 performances and come back again. Whereas normally an A1 form will take about 6 to 8 weeks. But that's now disappeared. So there is a replacement for the A1 form. It's some C something, 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 something. But there's no guarantee that the production houses or the concert orchestras in those countries are actually going to honour it. So you've got the situation at the moment that if they don't honour it, a musician or an opera singer is going to go to, let's say, Germany. I'm not picking on Germany, but let's say Germany. They will get deducted withholding tax. They'll get deducted all sorts of social security, solidarity tax, you name it, they'll get taxed it. Probably about 50% of their income will disappear. They come back to the UK and the only thing they can offset against that income is the withholding tax. And then they've still got to pay national insurance on their gross fee, which therefore means, you might be going over for 40% of your salary or 40% of your bill, plus pay an agent's fee on the gross salary. I say salary, it's not really a salary, but it's their performance fee. So they've been stitched up royally. And also with musicians going abroad with their instruments. It depends on how you travel with your instrument, but they might have to get a carnet to get the instrument out of the UK into another country and then back again. And I believe those carnets are something like £365 a time. So some of my musicians play in various different orchestras several times a year. So that several times a year, they've got to pay for a carnet to get their instrument out there. And if they go on a touring basis with a van full of kit, just don't even ask that. So with Brexit, musicians, opera singers have been royally stitched up.
So it sounds like an incredibly bleak time
Yeah.
for this particular sector. Louise, on top of everything else. So I think that's a nice bit of context, because you originally caught my eye to come on today's show because of a comment which you made on a webinar on Accounting Web with Rebecca Bennyworth
Yeah.
on making tax digital. So Rebecca Bennyworth on this Accounting Excellence webinar was talking through just the various ways in which practitioners can perhaps start to get on board with MTD. But Louise, your situation, as we've heard just then, is kind of unique in a way that your whole client base are under so much are still going through so much uncertainty, and their livelihoods, it feels like is very much up in the air. So looking ahead for MTD for your practice, MTD for income tax, it is I can fully imagine why you would I post in these comments just questioning just what a practice like yours can possibly do.
Hmm. Yeah, apart from sit under the table and cry and drink coolies, I think that was it. So I love
So,
Rebecca. I love Rebecca's webinars. You know, absolutely brilliant. But yes, for my practice, so I have 600 clients that are split across self-assessment companies, etc. Let's just take 500 clients will have to be in MTD for income tax. Those 500 clients, a few of them do use accounting software. Very few of them. Most of them are Excel spreadsheets or packets of paper. And it's really difficult for them to actually sit down and understand what would go even into an Excel file to say, this is my income. Well, they're okay with income, actually. These are my expenses, etc., etc. So often in January, I get in excess of 150 tax returns to do. To then trying to explain to them, no, this now has to be done quarterly, electronically, kind of blows their mind out, you know. And I'm quite a cynical person. So when they ask why, and I said, oh, because there's this tax gap, etc., etc. But I think in a couple of years' time after it, you'll be paying tax on a quarterly basis, you know, because I am a cynical person, and we all think that will be the case. But trying to find software that A, they can afford, and B, they can operate and is specific to them is going to be a nightmare. I am a Xero person. However, they can't really afford the £28 a month that Xero will cost them. I get thrown things like, oh, well, there are partner solutions, etc. But that's all very well if I was doing the bookkeeping, because I can put them onto Xero and import their bank statements if they had a separate bank statement. Most of them don't. It's all tied up with their personal stuff. But then it means I'm doing all the work. And if I'm doing all the work for 500 clients for bookkeeping into Xero or something, I'm going to be very dead after the first quarter, let alone by the end of that tax year. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time trying to find stuff that my type of client can use in order to satisfy the quarterly reporting, and then panic like anything when I get to the fifth period to do.
so it sounds like there's a lot to take on there, Louise. What's your is there light at the end of the tunnel? Are you is there some um, is there some kind of positive that you can um, grab from this situation, or is it still very much rolling up your sleeves and just trying to make the best out of it?
It's still at the moment a roll up the sleeves and see what's going on. I would love to get involved with a software provider that can actually do stuff specific to my industry. So it's all very well the likes of, let's say, Free Agent or QuickBooks saying, oh, yeah, you can do this. It goes into the 9 categories, but the 9 categories of spend for self-employment means absolutely nothing to the musicians. They can't really analyze what's going on in their business because it doesn't give you in the absolute detail what you need. You've also got, they embed HMRC rules into it. So if they see a receipt for Costa Coffee, you know, it goes into disallowables, which is rubbish, because you've got somebody that's had an afternoon rehearsal and then going on to an evening performance. They can't get back home to get a meal. They can't take a prawn sandwich in a really sweaty rehearsal room because they'll probably be very ill when they get round to eating it. So there's always nuances to do with specific industries, but those type of software people don't make allowances for those nuances. So I need to try and find if there's anything out there like a software provider that would work on a niche sector to say, okay, this is the niche. I can give you, say, 400 out of the 500 clients to say, this is what we're going to use. And at the moment, it's an Excel spreadsheet.
Right. Well, a nice way to bookend the podcast. I say we start with Excel and we fall back with Excel.
Yeah, there you go.
Ray, and any thoughts about just the plight of this particular sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually that you mentioned, Louise, about sort of Zoom singing lessons and so on. And my other half is she's also a musical accountant, and she's been preparing for, I can't remember which grade it is, but she's finally decided to sort of get some proper singing lessons and pass an exam for her singing, and she's been doing that over video calls and so on. And I think it's, you know, in her case, it's partly as well just this consciousnness that her singing teacher, who is a choir master, has really struggled to, you know, maintain an income in the last year. It's just so much, that whole set of jobs that they were doing has just been removed. You know, there's nothing they can do about it. So I think there's certainly a bit of, sort of willing on the part of musicians to sort of support each other where they can. But yeah, and it's interesting as well, as you were saying about the fact that it's the post-Brexit situation, without wishing to subject Richard to having to deal with any post-Brexit chat feedback from Accounting Web readers. I think, yeah, that sense that the plight of musicians is one of those things that I think a lot of people would just say, and performers more generally would just say, you know, well, what does the fishermen in the northeast of England care about musicians? And unfortunately, that does seem to be where we've got to. Is this just writing off of that whole creative, very important creative industry as just being, you know, post Brexit? Who cares? That's not what the current government is particularly invested in. They would say otherwise, but, you know, I have friends who work in theatre and things, and they feel pretty unsupported, I think. So yeah.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing your story, Louise. It's certainly a really fascinating story. So thank you very much.
I'm
for
passionate
taking the time.
about it.
Absolutely. Our listeners can definitely tell that as well. So thank you very much. And thank you, Ray, as well, for joining us on the podcast today. That's all we got time for. So for all your news from the world of accountancy, please join us as ever on accountweb.co.uk. But until next time, I've been Richard Hattersley. Bye for now.